The National Assembly has passed the Basic Education Laws Amendment. The bill will see parents or guardians face jail time if their children are not enrolled when they reach school age. The controversial bill has been rejected by most opposition parties. To unpack this, I'm joined by education specialist Professor Metcalfe, who joins us virtually from here in Johannesburg. Mary, thank you so much for your time, as always, on these very important matters. Now, some would look at this bill and say there are parts of it that really isn't rocket science. Why do we need to put this down in black and white? Surely everybody knows a child needs to be enrolled in school. But I suppose when you're dealing with a country like South Africa, where there's so many serious disparities, it doesn't always go without saying that everybody knows when a child should be enrolled in school or that a child should be taken care of in terms of their education.
Absolutely, Marcel. You know, one of the things that I've found puzzling about the whole furore about compulsory education is everywhere in the world, led by the United Nations and Sustainable Development Goals, there's an international commitment that all children should be at school. Now, this particular concern around compulsory education, I think, is not taking a full reading of what the bill says, because it says responsibility for children to attend school, which, as you say, is not rocket science, they must, is the joint responsibility of the parent and the state. And the section in the law makes it the responsibility of government to ensure that there are places, and it makes the responsibility of the parent to ensure that their child attends. It also provides for a process which is looking at why is the child not attending school, investigating the absence, attempting to assist. And then the thing that puzzles me the most, this is the same legislation that's been in place since we passed the South African Schools Act in 1996. It's not new. The only thing that's changed is that we've changed the age of compulsory school attendance. Instead of being the year in which you turn 7, it's now the year in which you turn 6. So I agree with you, in short.
A focus in this bill, in these amendments, also is put on how it confirms the abolishment of corporal punishment and bans the bringing of liquor into public school premises or being in possession of alcohol. Now, again, would we see this in reaction to the fact that we're seeing time and time again now that our school premises are becoming a reflection of the ills that so many of our communities are battling with, be it crime, be it just violence, drug use, domestic abuse, and the list goes on. Is this a move to try and strengthen schools and ensure that they indeed continue to be a safe space for our young people?
Well, I think the whole bill is very focused in terms of schools being a safe space. And it's very good for the public to always remember that schools are not separate from society. All of the social ills impact on the work of teachers and the work of the school in trying to provide a safe environment and a constructive environment for learners. Where the dispute came about selling alcohol on the school premises, and there was almost, as I saw it, unanimous rejection of the idea that came from as a request from some school governing bodies, that when a school governing body wants to run a function, it should be able to get permission to sell alcohol. But for the reasons that you described, there was just complete rejection of even that limited application to sell alcohol in school premises. And I was fascinated by the unanimity of what I saw in terms of the rejection of that.
Now, during your long career in the space, I'm sure you would agree, you've seen the rise and rise of the school governing bodies who have become very, very powerful entities in various parts of the country, in schooling districts, as it were. And it's a power that many of those governing bodies almost take quite personally. So it wasn't a surprise that a big spotlight in these amendments falls on what opposition parties say is centralizing power and taking over language and admission policy away from school governing bodies. How do you read these changes?
This is another example of something that I think we need to look at exactly what the legislation says. For me, it again starts with compulsory education and the fact that the government has a responsibility to provide places. Those places are places in schools, and schools are resourced by the state in terms of public schools. Now, if there are changes in the demographics, in the composition of the community that the school serves, and there are changes in terms particularly of language, and there may be spaces in a school which are needed by learners who are not speaking the language that is the medium of instruction of the school. And if government needs to place those learners, they need to engage with the school governing body, which continues to have responsibilities in terms of determining language policy, to say, given the circumstances, can we have a conversation about admission policies? Because as the state, we've got the responsibility to place children in public schools. Private schools is another matter, but public schools are funded by the state, and state must find places for all children.
I note that you said, you used the phrase, can we have a conversation? And you did it in a very muted way. But unfortunately, we've seen these conversations get very heated, often at the school gates between parents, often between parents of different races and different backgrounds, now having to share space in communities where they didn't have to share before. Why do you think this is still such an emotive thing?
The emotion we've seen often focuses particularly on Afrikaans. And I like to be able to do two things here. Number one, to stress that there's 11 languages in this country, applies to all of them. There's many parts of the country where we have a very close mix of people speaking different languages. You know, in rural areas even, for example, in the border between KZN and Eastern Cape, there's often children of different languages attending one school, and that has to be managed. Where it becomes a big media issue is because it often touches on perceptions of privilege in relation to schools which, because of the alignment between language and race in terms of Afrikaans, it's seen as holding on to privilege. What I think we need to do is to assert the importance of all of our languages, the state's commitment to all of our languages, to make that concrete, to make people feel that their language is being respected. But we also need to be realistic about where we need to fully utilize all of our resources, including available spaces and schools. And we need to see it as an advantage and a benefit to all of our children to be in diverse environments, linguistically diverse environments. Imagine if more of our young people going into the world were able to speak confidently more than the one language that was the language of the home. Would contribute to social cohesion.
And indeed, something we've seen play out in the field of play at the Rugby World Cup just this week. Our diversity in languages made international headlines. One final question before I let you go, Prof. Is part of the problem the fact that the Education Department has not kept up with demand for school places, that they have not kept up with the schedule of having to build schools in the communities that are growing at its fastest, or in the areas that need it most?
There's several reasons why this happens, where it happens. Firstly, because sometimes new enrollments come that are unplanned. It's not a question of a new town or township that's been formally established. Often it's informally established areas that happen very quickly, and the lead time to develop a school is at least 4 years. You have to go through all the planning processes, etc., etc. And so sometimes departments are caught off their guard. That is often a consequence of interprovincial movements. people moving from one province to another because of a perception of greater job opportunities or better schooling. There's a lot of work that goes into monitoring those movements, and they're fascinating. There's movements into provinces, out of provinces, but unplanned new settlements mean that they're not schools. And Gauteng and also Western Cape have become very skillful in being able to move, for example, containers into areas, because you also can't have children traveling these long distances from where the new homes have been established temporarily to where they may be able to find schools. So education departments have to be very responsive, and it is a constant challenge.
Prof. Mary Metcalfe, thank you for your time as always. It's always a sobering conversation talking to you. We appreciate